Hi, I am Viljami Lappalainen and this is my blog. This is second video this day because the previous one was sort of about mystical topics and this one I want to talk about philosophy. Well, at least my personal philosophy, so don't expect any great revelations here. They are just because I feel that systematic structure thinking about the world is necessary because it helps to sort of live life because at least I've felt often enough a little bit lost. So, in case it might help actually somebody to think about their own lives and live good meaningful life, I want to talk about how to think about the world. I've sort of prepared for you know notes for this video because I try to be able to express my ideas well enough. But anyway, so I feel that to start off, I feel that this I've I've mentioned it before, but how we are fundamentally ignorant of the world and unable to reach it at all because everything we experience is our mind and it's only informed by experiences and analyzed by our cognition, and by that it means it's just a sort of a little bit like a dream. We never know about the world itself, only how our mind interprets our experiences, or our mind might just invent things in a way that it seems like dreams are a little bit like that. It's things happening within our mind without obvious relationship to the world. Of course, at times we can be thirsty within our dreams and unable to slake our thirst because our body itself is um, thirsty, and actions within dream cannot cure thirst that is real. So I think world there outside is world. It's just that we might never know about it because well that's just how it is. Nevertheless, I feel that the there's sort of important to think that it's very likely that world is structured in a way that it seems that we can predict how world would be like with a high probability. I mean, engineers can design airplanes that are reliable to high degree. So we can have good models about the world even if we are unable to know about the world directly. We can just infer properties, but inferring things can work very, very well. And that's sort of that. I like to think that world is sort of algorithmic in a way that there seems to be sort of different systems within a world that we can study. And of course, we have our own body that is expressed in this physical world. Our mind seems to run on our body in the sense that there seems to be that brain seems to determine our mind in some sense. If we get brain damage or something, it affects our cognition apparently. Same way, if we drink alcohol, it affects how we think. So our experience seems to be dependent on our physical body that runs on physics. Of course, our mind seems to be sort of limited also other things, not just physics in a way, but also by mathematics, just like world is, in a way that I like to think that our cognition is like a machine running on algorithm, probability and games. Just because we have to use information just like everything else. We have no special privileges by being experiential things within the world. So it's just that because we are experiencing the world, there's this fascinating distinction between sort of how we can learn about the world and probabilities of it by finding better models, better understanding how world works. But there is also that we can sort of regulate world. If we find out world doesn't match our expectations, we can change world. So I think that there are at least two ways to relate to the world. When the world is wrong, we can, when there's mismatch between our ideas and the world, we can fix world or fix our ideas. So that's, I think, it's a very useful way to think about the world. And there's also that because when we act on the world, there's sort of possibility of creating these arbitrary spaces of choices. Because within our mind we can imagine calculating different things like say 7 times 14 is 7 times 10 plus 7 times 4 is 70 plus 28 is 98. Okay, so we can do mental calculations and it requires arbitrary choices made within our minds. Same way we can make arbitrary choices by drawing things on paper, and that's a very important thing because by having these arbitrary situations where we can make arbitrary choices, we can sort of bring ideas into the world, and that allows us to utilize dynamics world has. It's why we can build machines, because we can arrange world in arbitrary structures that we might beforehand study how our models predict how world would work, in a way that's very fascinating way how we use arbitrary spaces, first mentally thinking about things by arranging world first in arbitrary matters, possibly even randomly, learning how world works and forming mental model, and then using mental model to design a system in how we want to arrange world, and then arrange world that way, and then build technology. That's sort of a funny thing, I think, and very fascinating way to think about the world. And there is sort of fascinating thing because we can have infinite number of explanations. There might, in principle, there might be infinite number of explanations. We just personally can't ever think even large number of them, because our cognition seems to be limited, which is very important thing I might return to later. But there can be sort of dominating explanations why world is. Essentially, when we are regulating the world with our actions, we are dominating reason why world is a way it is, because we force world to um, follow our ideas by our actions. And that sort of helps us to understand, because I mean there can be other dominating reasons why world is the way it is. For example, uh, if tide is rising on a shore, the tides can sort of dominate other reasons why things are the way they are. So there can be different processes in the world that sort of dominate it in a way that being explanations why things are the way they are, and how we can ignore other explanations because they are a lot more flimsier. And that's sort of fascinating combined with how we can regulate world to follow certain ideas, because we can, if we agree that, for example, accounting should work a certain way and are careful enough that world seems to work that way, then when we are doing, for example, inventory, is everything there where it should be, and we notice it is no, notes on paper don't match inventory that we have, we can know there's something off. And that's sort of how we use our sort of dichotomical thing between relationship between arbitrariness of world, mind, and how ideas can be explanations how world is. Finding out that world didn't match our ideas how world should be. So that brings us to sort of how individual experiences seem to be sort of very limited. I mean, what I know and understand through learning about the world, it's very individual point of view. And that's sort of, I mean, other people can have different experiences with which sort of is related how we can still use sort of ideas how world should be, and that sort of we can communicate general agreements on world even when our individual experiences can differ. But I think point about individual points of view is very important, because I mean sort of, even if we have general abstract idea how, for example, organization works, within that framework there's still plenty of opportunities things to be differently. And it's so individual understanding of organizations can differ a lot. And I mean that individual point of view is also related to how we learn about the world, and how I think, for example, what's the word? I don't know. I mean, how if individuals are treated differently based on their personal properties or characteristics, they experience different world. And that's actually something I feel is very fascinating, because if people are really offered different opportunities, they are unable to know how others experience things. They can observe their actions but not know if it's about their personal sort of personality, or because they experience different environment, because they are treated differently. So things become very confused in a way, because if when people are treated differently. And what's more fascinating even is that because we are learning things when we learn to expect world to behave in certain way because we have experienced something, then we preempt those things by our actions. So being treated differently in past can affect future. And so it's really poisonous to be treated differently from others. Not just because in a moment you have different opportunities, but because that teaches you about the world. There, it is actually those our opportunities in the world. They are deeply related to how organizations and society work. I think because I mean we can have these abstract ideas about the world that we inflict on the world by by acting out the society and organizations we think. I mean, shops have people selling stuff. Salespersons can sort of act their role to form machine of the shop. Well, it's really sort of a very fascinating thing because we make machines out of people in a way, from machine and people and technology. But that is actually fascinating because those environments, when they are well defined, they are sort of gamifying reality in a way. Because well, when we talk about something costing something, that's a sort of mental model that we can use because we have inflicted structure on the world. We can treat our world as a machine or game, and by that we create opportunities that there otherwise would not have been. In when I like to say this in a way that you can make career out of running in circles. I mean, there are people who sprinters, runners, who actually do exactly that, running in circles fast enough that people are willing to pay them to do that again and again, which is sort of funny. But that is happens only because we have society that wants to reward running in circles. It's very fascinating, and but effectiveness of these ways, things you like to do, be it running or doing other things, only works because there's how you interface with other processes of society, what opportunities others offer, what interfaces they offer. And that's sort of funny thing because I mean your actions need not change for your behavior to make sense or be nonsensical. Only thing that needs to change is sort of how the world around you treats you. I mean, we do sort of bring many ideas about society, organizations in the reality, very many different ways. By our mental actions, we can calculate things, we can write programs, um, we can play games, live action role playing games, to imagine whole societies for a while. There's plenty of different things how we utilize ideas to change reality momentarily or in long term, like with technology. Hmm. And they are limited always by sort of invisible limits, like of probabilities, mathematics in general, algorithms and games that sort of we we can sort of grapple with probabilities like rolling dice to see how they tend. Some often I number tends to follow a Gaussian curve and everything. I mean, we can sort of indirectly observe how different mathematical concepts do affect world and reality. And that's something how we can abstractly understand how our mind sort of has to be limited by these similar processes that affect world in very real sense, even if there they are unphysical things. Mathematics isn't in a world, but its necessary structures still seem to affect the world and our minds. And that is actually something I'm deeply fascinated by, how our mind grapples with invisible restrictions it has to has. But at the same time, I mean, there are plenty of invisible things that affect our minds too, in a way. We can imagine gods, we can imagine societies, and as long as we act as if they are true, those limitations, how we imagine expectations of others, then they affect us. God's expectations and everything, it can affect world through us because we imagine them and act as if they are true. Mm. And that same way, it is also necessary to sort of act to these invisible imagined things, because I mean that's what learning is. I mean, when we learn about how world is expected to be, we can act better. So when we act on our imaginations, it can be learning, but we can have, but it can be something else. That's sort of fascinating about learning, because at times learning can work against us if we learn to expect that we will be bullied and avoid society because of that. Then how we learn things has worked against us possibly if not everybody is bullied. That's deeply fascinating thing, I think. But there is still, because I mean, our mind isn't really sort of purely logical information processing system, but we live out our narratives. I mean, it's sort of enjoyable to think about things, stories. That's, I mean, people like to read novels, novel after novel, story after story. It's enjoyable to think and imagine things. Watching television, it's all sort of pleasurable, and we like deeply enjoy all those experiences, those purely things within mind. They are important enough for us to act, because those are things that matter to humans, the experiences themselves, what we have within our mind. But that brings us to sort of dreams and religion world, because I mean, because we enjoy imagining novels within our minds, and we can dream. It's sort of this fascinating thing, because our minds are sort of what matters to us very often, what we imagine, our stories we tell about ourselves to ourselves, about others to ourselves, about ourselves to others. They, those dreams, stories, narratives, they are what seems to matter to people. because those are things through which we experience the world. And we only interact with our imaginations of the world most of the time. And because we have created a world to match our ideas, it's actually very reasonable at times. People like that world matches our imaginations. It's fascinating, I think. But still, we can have sort of things know about world. I mean, we can have those models, but they are often because we have been able to hold ourselves to certain patterns, how to produce models about the world through measuring observations, to analyzing certain patterns and choosing different models of that world and using those models to further up sort of these processes. But that's sort of fascinating, I think, too. Oh yes, there's another thing I wanted to comment on, how we can have these roles, because we can hold ourselves to certain patterns. It's very deeply fascinating when we can take roles, how we behave in the world, and those roles can offer others interfaces with which affect their roles. So our interactions with each other, they can have sort of cumulative, because if we act certain pattern, others act in certain patterns. Sometimes those patterns can interact to build more, be building blocks of sort of more complex information processing. Oh, well, I mean, there are still many things I sort of could talk about. It's almost 30 minutes long, this video at this point, but I'll shortly want to comment on how, since we react to how our ideas are within our minds and our narratives, then sort of I think it's very fascinating to note how people like to talk about things. Because I mean, often I feel that if you listen to people talk, just let them talk. They cycle through randomly through different topics they like to talk about. If people don't have them, if you talk with people who tend to forget things, they can start about the same topic several times through the same conversation. So it's sort of, I feel that people are sort of random machines at times, like, and there are certain ideas that they like to repeat. Myself too, of course. And it's also that what we like to project, like what roles, what we like to be thought about by individuals or generally. We can hold those patterns and hold them purposefully too. If people want to pretend to be something, sometimes we do it for fun. Live action role playing games, we can pretend to be other people because it's fun. Living out narratives is fun, but it can be also purposeful for gain, or just because it's just what people do, instinctive. And since we react to these ideas within the world, we can have social representations as an idea is important to understand that we have these sort of simplified ways of thinking and talking that really seem to affect people. What you have right to say and when. And that's why sort of like how, for example, in representations of the social book has these chapters where they talk about hegemonizing representations, when certain ways of talking dominate others. Anyway, I think this is it. It's been 30 minutes. So, thanks for your time. I'm Viljami Lappalainen and this is my blog. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.